My husband left me after his mother's funeral. He shocked me by saying, "You're a burden I no longer want to carry." Then 2 days later, a stranger handed me her bracelet and said, "He gave me this to replace yours." My hand started shaking. My name's Joelle. I'm 42. Born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina. I've lived here most of my life, just a little ways outside the city center where the mountains rise and fall like slow breaths. My husband, Colin Brewster, was someone people admired. He was the steady one in his friend groups, the voice of reason at dinner parties. Reliable. Polished. Put together. Or so everyone thought. We met 13 years ago at a local arts and crafts fair. I remember it clearly because it was the first time in years I left without reservation. He was buying a landscape print of Lake Lure, and I made a joke about how every man thinks he's a nature enthusiast until the first mosquito bite. He laughed too hard. Told me I was funny. Different. We had coffee. Then dinner. Then an entire life. I moved into his home just 6 months later. I was working freelance as a graphic designer, steady enough income but flexible, and he had just been promoted to a regional role at his logistics company. The house was his, in name and mortgage, but over time we made it ours. I added plants, painted the walls, and built a studio space out back. We didn't have kids, by choice, but we had a rhythm. Or so I thought. Then came his mother, Ardith. A proud Charleston matriarch, draped in pearls and perfumed disdain. She hated me from the start, though she was too genteel to say it outright. Everything she did was indirect. Comments like, "Well, in my day, women had more time to prepare dinner because they didn't have to chase clients," or "Colin always preferred traditional girls." Still, I showed up. I visited. I hosted. I smiled through the condescension because I loved her son. When Ardith was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I became her caretaker. Not out of obligation, but because Colin was swamped with work, and I couldn't imagine her alone during treatment. I drove her to appointments at Mission Hospital. I sat beside her through chemo. I made her bland soup and cut her pills in half when her hands shook too much to manage. And slowly, surprisingly, she softened. She still never really liked me, but in her final weeks, she would touch my hand when I tucked her in. She passed on a cloudy Wednesday morning in October. The house was still when the call came. Colin was already dressed in a black suit, as if he knew before they told us. I held his hand at the funeral. Tight. I didn't cry, I felt hollow. I'd spent every ounce of emotion in those last weeks. I was numb. Colin didn't speak a word the entire service. His jaw was clenched, face unreadable. The day after, I made chicken soup. The same kind his mother used to make. I called him for dinner. He came into the kitchen, looked at the 2 bowls on the counter, then at me. And said it. "You're a burden I no longer want to carry." No preamble. No conversation. Just those words. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I think I blinked 3 times, trying to understand if this was a joke or some trauma response. But he just walked past me, took his coat from the hook, and left. That night, I sat on the living room floor with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, soup untouched. He didn't come back. He didn't call. 2 days later, still in a haze, I drove to the Asheville Mall to return the black dress I wore to the funeral. It still had the tag on. I thought maybe doing something normal would make things feel less collapsed. As I was walking past the indoor fountain, I felt a tap on my shoulder. A woman, maybe in her mid-30s, sharp features, red pixie cut, long beige coat, was standing behind me. She looked hesitant. "Excuse me," she said, "are you Joelle Brewster?" I nodded. Slowly. Still not quite in my body. I'm sorry to do this here," she said, then extended her hand. In her palm was a silver bracelet. It was identical to the one Colin had given me for our 10th anniversary. The same delicate chain, same subtle curve, same engraving on the inside, always you. Only this one had a sapphire embedded in the clasp. Mine had fallen out years ago. He gave me this to replace yours, the woman said. My entire body locked. Hands trembling. What? I managed to say. I'm Dahlia, she said. I've been seeing Colin for a few months. I didn't know about you until I saw the obituary in the paper. Your name was listed as his wife. I couldn't breathe. She didn't look smug. She didn't even look angry. Just sad. Like she'd been lied to as much as I had. I confronted him, she continued. He admitted it. Told me he was about to move on. I thought you should know. I took the bracelet. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything. I just turned and walked away. Every step felt like I was dragging my bones behind me. I sat in my car for 40 minutes before I drove home. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened our shared banking account. And I started looking. The numbers didn't lie. Colin had been slowly siphoning money from our joint savings account, nothing drastic enough to be noticed at first glance. $50 here. $100 there. But when I pulled 6 months of statements and laid them side by side, it was obvious. Over $9,000 had been rerouted into a second checking account under his name. I didn't recognize the bank. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My mouth was dry. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. Strategic. Planned. This wasn't a man who had an affair in a moment of weakness. This was a man who had plotted an exit while I was folding his mother's laundry and spoon-feeding her applesauce. My hands moved on their own after that, screenshots, folders, Google searches. I pulled his email up. I wasn't expecting much. But the idiot had left it logged in on our shared desktop. Dozens of emails to and from Dahlia. Dinner reservations. Airbnb bookings in Charlotte. And one thread with the subject, finalizing sale, confidential. I opened it. Colin was in the process of trying to sell our house behind my back. He'd been corresponding with a private buyer, someone from Charleston, ironically. The paperwork wasn't signed, but the intent was there. That's when the sick realization landed in my stomach. He thought if he left fast enough, I'd just let everything go. Grieve quietly. Fade into the background. He was counting on the shock. On my silence. On my shame. He didn't know me as well as he thought. I called Nora. I told her everything. She showed up that night with 2 bottles of Merlot and a giant tote of legal pads. She's not a lawyer, but her sister is. We FaceTimed her right then and there. You need to get ahead of this, her sister, Brienne, said. Freeze the joint accounts. File for a legal separation. And make sure your name is on that deed. It was one of the only good things I had insisted on, early in our marriage. By the next afternoon, I had filed for a financial injunction to freeze any sale of the property. I contacted a real estate lawyer. I secured the studio contents, my work, my files, and changed the locks. Colin hadn't tried to return yet. I didn't know where he was staying. Probably with Dahlia. Or someone else. That night, I opened the silver bracelet box Dahlia had given me. I laid it next to mine. The engraving was the same. Always you. I laughed. Loud. Almost manic. The audacity of that man. The sheer gall to recycle a declaration he had once sworn to me. It wasn't sadness I felt anymore, it was heat. Not anger, not yet. But heat. Something stirring in my chest like wildfire under ice. The next few weeks moved fast. I found a small rental near the River Arts District. A quirky old house with peeling paint and wild roses in the yard. Nora helped me move. I took only what was mine. I didn't want to drag a single item of his into this new space. During this time, I began to hear things. Not rumors, facts. Through friends. Through Nora's endless network of acquaintances and mutuals and Facebook lurkers. Turns out, Dahlia wasn't the only one. There was a woman in Atlanta. Carmen. She worked for one of the companies Colin had been doing consulting for. They had been on a business retreat in September. He told me it was just a strategic planning weekend. He brought her a bracelet too. Not the same one, but the same brand, same engraving. He'd built an entire template of seduction. Polished lines. Recycled promises. Silver words for temporary women. Each revelation felt like a crack in a vase that had already shattered. My therapist, yes, I started therapy, finally, told me something that stuck with me. She said, Joelle, he wasn't living a double life. He was living a fractured one. And you were the only whole part in it. I wrote that down. Every time I wanted to scream, I read it. By the time Colin's attorney reached out to discuss a fair settlement, I was 5 steps ahead. I had proof of the financial misconduct. I had proof of his attempt to sell the home without my consent. I had documentation of his affairs, not for emotional leverage, but for the integrity of the case. North Carolina still respects marital misconduct in separation hearings. I never spoke to him directly. Everything went through my lawyer. That was the rule I set. No contact. But he tried. Oh, he tried. He emailed me once. A single line. I think we both need closure. Closure? The man left me while I was grieving his mother. While I was still washing her bed linens and throwing out her expired meds. He vanished like a ghost and then reappeared in the arms of a stranger, calling me a burden as he slipped out the back door. Closure was no longer his to have. He had the luxury of detaching. Of choosing a new life without the wreckage. I didn't get that choice. I had to crawl through the wreckage. I had to breathe through it. Live inside it. And rebuild from it. Weeks bled into months. The paperwork dragged. Court dates were set, then rescheduled. Colin's lawyer attempted to paint our separation as mutual, as if I had somehow agreed to being discarded like week-old leftovers. He wanted to negotiate a clean break, no spousal support, equal split of assets, quick signatures. My lawyer laughed when she read the first draft of the proposal. His arrogance will be his undoing, she said, tapping her pen on the line where Colin had suggested I forfeit my claim on the house in good faith. We countered with facts. Bank records, documentation of attempted property sale, emails confirming the affair. Colin's team went silent for a week. During that time, I tried to live. Not thrive, just live. I took walks by the French Broad River, bundled up in my old college hoodie and a scarf that still smelled like cinnamon from the last holiday I'd bothered to decorate for. I joined a pottery class at the community center just to get my hands moving again. It helped. The clay didn't expect me to be okay. It just needed shape. It just needed pressure. The therapist, Dr. Kaufman, encouraged me to write letters to Colin that I would never send. I filled 3 journals. Some pages were raw with grief. Others were pure rage. Some were just confusion, scrambled lines like, was I really that easy to leave, or did you ever love me, or just the idea of me? One night, I wrote a list titled, Things He Will Never Take From Me. I included, my name, my talent, my stories, my Sundays, my laugh when no one's watching, my ability to survive, my damn house. The next day, I submitted a petition to retain sole residency of the home. My lawyer had advised we do it before Colin could push a forced sale through the court. His name was still on the mortgage, yes, but North Carolina law was on my side once we proved he had abandoned the property and me. It was about more than brick and drywall. That house had been my sanctuary and my prison. But leaving it on his terms? That was never going to happen. 2 weeks later, I received an email from Colin's new email address. Not the shared one. A personal one. The subject line was, I know I messed up. The message was 4 sentences. Joelle, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I made mistakes. I was grieving and confused and I didn't handle anything the right way. I still think about you. That was it. No apology. No accountability. Just a self-pitying attempt at opening the door he had slammed shut. I didn't respond. I showed it to my therapist. Letting go of power is harder for men like him, she said. They mistake silence for vulnerability. I wasn't silent. I was healing. Some days, the healing was active, like reclaiming my space, repainting the studio, buying fresh sheets that no longer smelled like cologne I didn't wear. Other days, it was passive. Crying into a bowl of cereal at 2 a.m. watching movies that reminded me of nothing. Sleeping with the lights on. I saw Dahlia again, once. It was unplanned. I was walking through the downtown farmer's market, picking out honey from a booth I loved, when I saw her across the crowd. She saw me too. We didn't avoid each other. She walked over. You look better, she said gently. I nodded. I am. There was a pause between us, heavy but not hostile. I didn't know, she said, again. When I found out, it made sense. The little red flags. He did the same thing before me, I told her. You're not the first. Her face twitched, something between regret and guilt. She opened her bag, pulled something out. The bracelet. She handed it back to me. I kept it because I thought it meant something. But it was just part of the lie. I took it. This time, not trembling. I don't think I ever really loved him, she admitted. I think I just liked how he made me feel about myself. I didn't say anything. She said goodbye. And that was it. I went home and put the second bracelet in the same velvet box as the first. Not as mementos of pain, but as reminders. That even when people try to duplicate their lives across others, the truth always surfaces. There is no such thing as a clean break when deceit is the foundation. Colin finally returned to Asheville a few months later for the court proceedings. He had lost weight. He looked older. More tired. He didn't acknowledge me in the hallway. Didn't make eye contact during the hearing. His lawyer did most of the talking. It was quick. Uneventful. Anticlimactic, almost. But something about the silence was poetic. The man who once filled rooms with charm now stood speechless, stripped of power, looking at a judge who had already made up his mind. The house was awarded to me. Full ownership. He was ordered to pay a settlement fee for his share of the joint account withdrawals. I didn't smile until I got to my car. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. It was breath. It was the first inhale in what felt like years that didn't catch on a jagged edge of betrayal. I wish I could say that after the court ruled in my favor, I moved on effortlessly, that I reclaimed my life in some grand, cinematic way. But real life doesn't work like that. Healing isn't linear. Closure isn't clean. It's a tangled thread you have to tug at slowly, patiently, hoping it doesn't unravel everything else in the process. The weeks following the hearing were quiet. Almost too quiet. I had gotten used to chaos, lawyers, emails, paperwork, discovering yet another truth about Colin I didn't ask for. Now that it was over, I found myself staring at my phone for no reason, pacing the house at odd hours like there was something unfinished. Because there was. It wasn't about Colin anymore. It was about me. Who I was without him. Who I had become because of everything he did, and everything I let slide before I knew better. Some nights, I'd sit out on the back porch wrapped in a throw blanket, drinking tea, just listening to the wind in the trees. I started a new playlist. One without any of the songs we used to listen to on road trips. No more James Taylor. No more Fleetwood Mac. It sounds silly, but even music had to be filtered. I needed a clean emotional palette. That winter, Nora gave me a candle-making kit. Said I needed a hobby that smelled like progress. We laughed. But I used it. I turned one of the bedrooms into a creative space, not just for work, but for things that didn't pay the bills. I made lumpy candles, poorly stitched pillowcases, and one oddly shaped ceramic mug that somehow became my favorite because it wasn't perfect. Because it felt real. Every once in a while, someone would mention Colin. Not on purpose. A mutual friend would bring up his name in passing, or someone from the neighborhood would ask how I was doing after the divorce. I never corrected them. Technically, we weren't even legally divorced yet, the separation was still being finalized. But I didn't have the energy to explain the timeline of betrayal to every well-meaning stranger. The truth was, by then, I didn't need them to understand. I had my own timeline now. One marked not by his betrayals, but by my resilience. One Sunday afternoon, about 3 months after the court hearing, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Just my name, written in Colin's handwriting. I stood on the porch for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. One paragraph. I'm sorry for how I left things. I thought I was doing the right thing by starting over, but I realize now that I destroyed the only part of my life that actually meant something. You were never the burden. I was. I hope one day you can forgive me. See. No, dear Joelle. No love. No actual attempt at accountability. I read it once. Then I lit it on fire with the very candle I had made weeks earlier. It burned slowly, the flame small but steady. I watched until the paper turned to ash. Then I swept it into an old mug, the misshapen one, and poured it down the drain. I never told anyone about the letter. Some things don't need to be shared. Some closures are best kept private, like a key you never intend to use again. Later that night, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was writing at first. A journal? A book? A testimony? All I knew was that I wanted to tell the truth. Not just about Colin. But about what it means to stay when someone is already leaving. About what it does to a person to love someone who has one foot out the door and the other in someone else's bed. I wrote for hours. I wrote about Ardith. About the way her eyes softened in her final days. About how she once squeezed my hand and whispered, "You deserved a better man." I wrote about the silver bracelets. How each one looked like love, but felt like a receipt. I wrote about Dahlia, about how betrayal binds people in strange ways, turning strangers into allies. I wrote about myself, not the version of me Colin curated, but the version that remained when everything else was gone. The one who stayed. The one who survived. I wrote until my fingers ached and my shoulders burned. Then I saved it as Joelle, unedited. Didn't send it anywhere. Didn't publish it. I just kept it. Because some stories aren't for other people. Some stories are for the person who lived through them. In the spring, I started renovating the kitchen. I knocked down the wall between the dining room and the pantry. I repainted the cabinets a shade of green that Colin used to hate. I replaced every drawer pull and installed a new faucet, sleek, matte black, modern. When the job was done, I stood in the middle of that kitchen and smiled. This was the room where he'd said it. You're a burden I no longer want to carry. And now? Now it was mine. Just mine. I stood there for a long time, barefoot on new tile, smelling of fresh paint, surrounded by silence that no longer hurt. By the time summer crept in, the house no longer whispered his name. The air was mine now. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was intentional. I had grown to love the hum of my ceiling fan at night, the creak of the old floorboards when I walked barefoot to the kitchen in the mornings, the breeze that came through the windows that I finally opened wide without fear of letting too much in. It was freedom. And it came quietly. Still, I knew the final page hadn't turned. Not yet. Not until the divorce was finalized. Not until Colin truly felt what it meant to lose me. And life, as it often does, handed me that moment without me asking for it. It came on a Wednesday. I was in the middle of designing a logo for a local coffee roaster. My freelance business was booming, finally, and I got a call from Carmen, the woman from Atlanta. Yes, that Carmen. The one he'd been seeing during his so-called business trips. I'd never spoken to her before. She introduced herself awkwardly, voice soft, unsure. "I hope I'm not overstepping," she said. "But I saw your name in an article, something about your community art program." I recognized it. "I figured it had to be you." She paused. I didn't say anything. I let her talk. "I broke up with him," she said. "A while ago. After I found out everything. But recently he's been calling me again. Leaving messages. I thought maybe you'd want to know." I closed my laptop slowly. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because he doesn't know how to let go. And I think he's hoping one of us will crack and let him back in." I sighed. "I won't." "I didn't think you would," she said, almost sounding relieved. "He used to talk about you like you were this impossible standard. Like no one measured up." That surprised me. For a second, I didn't know what to do with that. "Anyway," Carmen added, "I thought you deserved a heads up." "Thanks," I said. And meant it. I hung up, sat in silence for a long while, and realized something important. He had wanted a clean exit. A reset. A new life. But he wasn't thriving in it. He was floundering. Drifting. Calling old lovers. Looking for a life raft. He hadn't started over. He was still circling the drain. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and uploaded the first 3 chapters of Joelle, unedited to Medium. Then I attached it to an anonymous Reddit account and posted it in a forum about infidelity and resilience. I didn't use names. But the story was real. Raw. It was my truth. Within days, it blew up. Thousands of upvotes. Comments from women and men all over the country. People thanking me for putting words to what they'd gone through. Messages like, "I felt this in my bones, and this is exactly what happened to me," down to the silent kitchen. I felt something shift. Not in the world, but in me. This story that had once been my shame was now a mirror held up to so many others. And in that mirror, I saw strength. Not bitterness. Not regret. Just clarity. Weeks later, I received one last email from Colin. I didn't even open it. I forwarded it to my lawyer. The divorce was finalized in early August. I got the house, the studio, and full rights to the art nonprofit I'd started just months earlier. I even secured a clause that prevented him from contacting me again. No more emails, no more notes, no more weak apologies typed out in midnight desperation. Nora and I celebrated with Prosecco on the back porch. "You know," she said, looking out over the yard I'd replanted with native wildflowers, "you should host a retreat here. For women going through what you went through. Call it The Unburdened." I laughed. "That's so dramatic." "But perfect," she smirked. And it was. So I did it. 3 months later, I hosted the first weekend retreat for women navigating divorce, betrayal, and reinvention. 10 women, all strangers at first, gathered in my backyard under string lights and told stories that echoed and overlapped and healed in real time. We cried. We laughed. We made candles and wrote letters we never intended to send. We shared bracelets, different ones. Handmade, with their own engravings. Unburdened. It became more than a weekend. It became a movement. The bracelet Dahlia had given me? The one he gave to replace mine? I had it melted down by a local artisan and turned into 10 tiny charms, each engraved with a date, the first night of the retreat. I mailed one to Dahlia. No note. Just the charm. She posted a picture of it a week later on Instagram, captioned, "Some stories aren't ours to carry. But we can choose how they end." And Colin? Well, last I heard, he moved to Raleigh. Tried to start a consulting business that fizzled within a year. He's off social media. None of his old friends keep in touch. And me? I sit in a home filled with light, painted in colors I love, surrounded by people who speak my name with love and respect. I was never the burden. He was never the prize.